Welcome to The Connecting Place with Andrea Fabry, making the connection between health and your environment. Now, here's your host, Andrea Fabry.
Louis Slesin is a journalistic pioneer in the field of electromagnetic radiation. He had concerns about all of this well before many of us did. He started Microwave News in 1981. Microwave News covers the entire non-ionizing electromagnetic spectrum with emphasis on cell phones and power lines, as well as radar and broadcast towers. In 2003, Microwave News converted to a web-based format, but you can find all of the print issues at the website microwavenews.com. Now, on May 25, 2016, Louis published an article titled, "Cell Phone Radiation Boosts Cancer Rates in Animals. $25 million NTP study finds brain tumors." Within 24 hours, the government released the findings, or at least the preliminary findings of this report. So this tells you the influence of Microwave News. Louis, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I'd love to hear your story. What made you start this in 1981, well before people were talking about this?
Back then, most of the exposures were really in the workplace, and there was very little popular exposure. But of course, you could already back then, the patents have been granted for cell phones, and you could see the telecom, revolution starting to take place. And we knew back then, or at least I thought so back then, that this was going to be a growing area, and it is. Maybe I got into it a little bit early. It's taken quite a while for people to catch on about what this exposure means. But we're there now for sure.
What was your background? I mean, were you a journalist? Were you in the technological field? What was your work experience?
I had worked for a public interest environmental law firm called the Natural Resources Defense Council after getting my doctorate. In fact, before I got my doctorate, and then I went away to finish my thesis, as so often happens in these cases, and then went back to work for them. And it was a fascinating area, as I say, it was developing. And basically one day, Paul Brodeur, who wrote the important book called Zapping of America, that was serialized in the New Yorker back in 1976, and then appeared as a book, The Zapping of America, in the following year, came by our offices and tried to interest the people at NRDC to take up this subject. And I had actually read Brodeur's work on asbestos when I graduated from college in the late 60s, and was totally mesmerized by his reporting. And, so he brought a copy of the book, and, I devoured it and thought, it's what fascinating work because of the mix of technology and public health. But my background was in science and policy. I had degrees in science up to the master's level, and then went back to school to learn about policy. And my doctorate is in environmental policy. So this was you might call this a perfect case study of how to set policy on environmental health issues.
What was your vision in 1981 for Microwave News?
Survival. Basically, I didn't, I knew something about writing, but I had not gone to journalism school. I did not have a background in journalism. But the trick was, how do you stay in a field that if you're a consultant, which I could have tried to be, it's very hard to be a consultant and not do what your client wants you to do. And so you're kind of in what I consider to be, from the start, a compromised situation. So journalism was a way of doing this, and I took the model of subscription-based rather than going the nonprofit route, because if you annoy someone, and even in the nonprofit route, that funds your work. If you annoy them, and you could lose all your funding and you'd be out of business. The subscription model had a great attraction in that you annoy somebody, and God knows we did along the way. They cancel their subscription, but it leaves the bulk of the others standing, and that's how it worked. It was a hard business because A, we were, I think, ahead of our time, and B, a lot of people just didn't want to know about this. And I think you can see the reaction to the NTP study today. A lot of people still don't want to know about this.
Right.
What's interesting about the coverage, if you look at the coverage of the NTP study, is there's been a lot of coverage, but I challenge you to find one quote from the industry. They didn't have to do it because the press itself acted in that capacity by expressing skepticism about the results. So who are the cell phone companies now? In fact, it's Apple and Google and Microsoft. I mean, the Motorola's. Motorola is still in there, but Google bought Motorola. Microsoft bought Nokia, and of course the Apple phone is an international success. So these companies are not seen as manufacturers and polluters, but everybody loves them. So it's very interesting that I don't think that I've seen a quote from any of those companies in any of this. It's really quite amazing.
It really is. Do you ever try to contact them and get comments?
I didn't. Certainly not on this story, because when I wrote my initial story, of course, no one knew about the NTP results. We had a source who told us about it, and as I wrote in my original article, most people, when I called them for comment, a few mostly scientists or workers in the field, they were astonished by the result. Everybody basically didn't think this study would show anything, including the people doing the study who gave press interviews before the experiment got underway, saying, "Oh, we're doing this, but we don't think that it's going to show anything." The request for the study came in 1999.
Yes.
By the Food and Drug Administration, and they were basically punting. They didn't want to do it, so the way they got out of getting out of their responsibilities was to pass the buck to the National Toxicology Program (NTP) to do the study. And we should consider ourselves very lucky that the person that NTP picked to head up the study and design the study, Dr. Ron Melnick, is committed to public health, and that's really the important story here: is commitment to public health, to get the story out and to do the study in a way that would tell the public something about what the radiation risks are. Let me say a few words about what the study shows. Of course, the study does point to a cancer risk, but there's a more basic thing that it shows that I think is very important for your listeners to understand, and that is that it shows that the radiation is biologically active. And I cannot tell you how many people, including very senior scientists, don't believe that. That is, if it doesn't heat you up, think of a microwave oven, if it doesn't heat you up, it can have no effect. And that basically means that there are no cumulative effects. That is, one exposure, if it doesn't do any damage to you at that time, then you reset and there's no cumulative effect. I think this study shows that that's not the right way to think about what this radiation does.
And of course, you've felt this way all along. So how long did you sit on the story before you published it?
Well, not that long, actually, because I wrote a story about in 1999 when FDA, and I've been tracking it. And in fact, if people go to micronews.com, our website, and you look up, it was actually last November, I wrote a piece titled Institute of Environmental Health Secrets, which is a play on National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and that's the one of the parent agencies of NTP, and in fact, it's sometimes hard to distinguish NIEHS from NTP because they're basically the same people wearing the same hats. But I filed the Freedom of Information Act request in January of 2015. saying, well, what's going on? You're getting monthly reports from the contractor on this study. Let's have a look at these things. They should be public information. Well, as of today, basically close to 18 months later, there should be over 100 of those monthly reports back. The study actually got started in 2005, so there was 10 years of reports, and they've given me 18 months later, 2 of those reports, which say very little. In other words, NIH did not want to talk about it, and so I wrote this piece back in November of last year, talking about the study and how unresponsive NTP had been in terms of sharing what was going on, and also some of the controversies in the way the study was designed. For instance, one of the key things, and you'll see this in some of the reports, some of the numbers are low. That is, number of tumors and what's called hyperplasias, which are known as precancerous lesions on these animals. They're low, and everybody said, well, they're so low. Some of the skeptical journalists have said, well, they're so low that you don't have to worry about it. But you have to understand that the exposures were only carried out for 2 years. Now, there's a graph on my November story showing what happens after 2 years in other studies. Actually, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's in a separate story of you can see much clearer effects if you keep the exposures going. And, it was a money-saving decision to cut off at 2 years because, of course, the longer you expose the animals, the more expensive the experiment is. But, to limit it at 2 years is like stopping to worry what the radiation does to humans at the age of about 60. So I'm over 60, so of course, I'd like to know what happens after you're 60. And if you look at the graph, you see that if there is an effect, and of course there seems to be an effect according to the NTP study, that it becomes much clearer after the 2 years are up. So this was a controversy about the study, and there were other controversies, and these were spelled out in November of last year on micronews.com. So the basic point is that we've been tracking this, or I've been tracking this for a long time.
Right. And so then finally you got some concrete information from an inside source, is what it sounds like. You decided to publish it. Did you think the turnaround would be that fast from the government?
I clearly didn't know, but what I was being told was that the people at NTV wanted to get the story out. I say this to give them all due credit. They saw this as they started out not believing it. And then they saw the data and they believed it, and they thought it was a clear public health risk, and they wanted the story to come out. And so you can think perhaps we just helped it along a little bit.
Okay, let's talk about just some of the other questions that are arising, because I do remember the telemedia conference the day after, and the journalists that were online were from CNN, and I know you were there at CNN and NBC News, and the skepticism, the kinds of questions that it was like nitpicking and finding reasons to say this doesn't matter. But one of the things that came up was the lifespan of the control group versus the exposed group.
There are some unresolved issues. As you say, I listened to at the conference call, and I was quite amazed, like you were, at the reaction of the media. And as I said earlier in our conversation, the media took the role of the industry, which is, I've never seen that before. Where usually you get the opposite quote from an industry spokesman, like CTIA, the industry lobbying group, has been totally silent basically about this. They've not been put on the spot about this because they didn't have to be. But just going back to the question of
lifespan
of the animals. Just yesterday I posted a link on the Micronews website where just last week the toxicologist who headed up the study after Dr. Melnick left, Dr. Wyde, gave a presentation at a meeting in Belgium last week, and the PowerPoint has been released, and I posted the link for that PowerPoint, and all the graphs are showing the lifespan of the animals. There are two different kinds of cell phone signals. They're all posted as part of that PowerPoint, and it's true that the lifespan of some of the animals were shorter at those graphs on that PowerPoint to get a better idea of what people are talking about. But the point I really want to make is, what I found really strange, frankly, is that the press, they were nitpicking in a way that made it sound like the NTP toxicologist hadn't thought about the implications of some of the questions that they were raising and had not, talked about them and chewed them over among themselves. The report that was issued had been peer-reviewed internally by quite a number of people, and certainly not everybody agreed on all the aspects of the study and what it showed. But as they said in the press conference, I think Dr. Bucher said 70% agreed that it needed to come out and were backing it. And what was interesting is, I think there was one quote on page 39 of the report it's been posted on the web that is the official, because the NTP did post the peer reviews. They were very straight about it. They didn't put their facts on the table, their report. They also put in the peer reviews. And I think basically most of the press reports who said, well, don't pay any attention, quoted the same quote from page 39. It sounds like there were talking points that were circulated by someone, I have not been able to find out who, that said, before you buy this stuff from NTP, look at this, and they all quoted that quote. It's very strange.
Well, don't you think it's in order to keep the feeling of doubt with this? As long as we have doubt, then people aren't going to wake up to this.
You're right. I mean, this issue of doubt is central, and a lot of people have trying to this phrase of manufacturing doubt is an industry strategy to try. I mean, look at climate skeptics, for instance, or cigarettes. There's this very important book called "Doubt is Our Most Important Product." This is the industry strategy. But again, to repeat myself, what I found perverse in a way is the industry didn't even have to employ this strategy. The press did it for them. And you have to ask yourself why.
And how would you answer that? Why is the media so intent on keeping the doubt going?
To be honest with you, I don't know. But no one has been worse than the New York Times. In terms of publishing stuff that simply is just not true. Why? I think journalists some science journalists see themselves as scientists themselves and think they know better. I mean, I'm frankly as perplexed as you are, because it's just, this idea that NTP did not weigh the negative aspects of the study before deciding that this was important enough to tell the public. I mean, again, the important fact here is NTP considered this important to release it before, the paper was published. And they saw this as important to get the word out. Now, unfortunately, the way the press has handled it, I think there's very little precautionary advice that has been suggested to the public. But we're not talking about no one is talking about giving up your cell phone, your smartphone. No one is talking about anything like that. They just said, be sensible. It's like playing with matches. You're not going to give up fire, but you're not going to let children play with matches. You're going to take simple precautions to limit risks, especially under uncertainty. And no one is saying, not NTP, not me, not anyone, is saying this is a done deal. Now we fully understand this risk. We're in a position now where we know this radiation is biologically active. We see that it can lead to cancer following long-term exposure, and there are ways of limiting the risk. That's all we're saying at the moment. More research needs to be done. Let me say that one of the reasons, actually, I was not a big supporter of this study initially was that we put all our eggs in one basket. This is the only study funded by the government in the United States today. I mean, that's, for a technology that affects pretty much every single American, that's really quite amazing that we put 25, and 25 is a low-ball estimate, by the way, in this one study. But, one of the effects, apart from cancer, that needs more attention is the whole issue of effects on fertility. Now, if you think about where especially men keep their phones, they keep them in their pocket. And let me tell you, when you keep your phone in your pocket, it's flush to your body with maybe just the separation of the width of the lining of your pocket. You are violating the FCC exposure standard. There's very little doubt about that. And there's a ton of work showing effects of this radiation on fertility. Now, that's all gotten lost in all this, but there's more data on the effects on fertility than there is on cancer. Yet no one is talking about this, and it just means that you don't carry your phone in your pocket. That's especially if if you want to have children.
Well, Louis, we are out of time. Louis Slesin, I can't, on behalf of so many of us who need someone who has studied this for a long time and is interested in public health, I can't thank you enough for your work. And I hope to speak with you again about these important issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to The Connecting Place, making the connection between health and your environment. Join us again next time for The Connecting Place with Andrea Fabry.